night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
It's Wednesday on the west, Thursday on the east. Many of you are stuck somewhere in between. Welcome to Beyond Reality Radio with me, Jason Hawes, and the always awesome J.V. Johnson.
We've been talking about Jack the Ripper on and off for over 130 years. Well, not you and me personally, but
no, I mean it would be pretty old.
Yeah, but the crime community, legend, lore, public opinion. You know, it's been one of those mysteries that's endured, obviously, because they haven't been able to find out who the criminal was. But just the gruesome nature of the crimes and the clandestine nature of the crimes and the victims that were selected and how they were selected and who they were. I mean, it's been one of these just enduring, fascinating mysteries. And our guest tonight, Michael Hawley, has been on the program before, Jay. I'm sure you remember. I think it was like June of last year.
Yep, last year.
He had written a book about one of the prime suspects. He believed it was Dr. Francis Tumblety, I believe. But now some scientists have released some information based on some DNA evidence that they think they have solved this mystery. And we're going to get into that tonight. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, this should be an interesting show. And I actually, when I was filming an episode of Ghost Hunters, we were over in the UK, and we went on one of the Jack the Ripper tours where they walk you all around the area. And it was some gruesome things that happened.
Yeah,
it really was.
There are a couple photographs of the crimes, and if you see those, you can tell very quickly, even though they're very primitive photographs, if you will. They were just unbelievably gruesome crimes. Just unbelievable. Yeah. I can't imagine if we had high-res photography back then what that would look like.
I would hope that they wouldn't show, though.
Yeah. But there's a couple other things I wanted to mention because we had I'm trying to remember their names now. Mark Sargent and Patricia Steer on the show not long ago.
Flat Earth.
Talking about Flat Earth. There's another group of Flat Earth folks. It's not the same organization who have decided they are going to raise money, charter a cruise ship, and sail to the end of the earth to prove once and for all that the earth is flat.
Do you think that maybe they're just trying to raise money for a free cruise?
Well, hey, I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to guess. But, man, if you were going to do it, this might be the way to do it.
Hey, everybody, I want to see if the earth is round. So do me a favor and pitch into my give Jay and JV a fun trip around the world when lots of alcohol.
Yeah. I wonder if we could raise money for that for you and me. I think.
Yeah, as long as we don't get too intoxicated, we'll be able to tell if the earth is round or flat.
Yeah, our analysis of the horizon may be off a little bit, but
it'll definitely be off. There's no question on that.
Yeah, this group is called the Flat Earth International Conference. And they are raising the money now, and they are looking for a 2020 launch of this excursion. Which, again, they say once and for all will determine whether or not this Earth is flat, which they believe it is.
Once and for all. So this will be
this will be the determiner.
Okay.
All you need to do is contribute to their cause, right?
I don't know. I don't. Whatever.
No. I know. I know. I mean, you and I share the opinions of that.
Well, it's, and I can look at it from very different opinions. Do I think the Earth is flat? No. Do I think that we're living in some sort of a Truman-type show environment? Well, I believe if there's a higher power, but it's not that the Earth is flat. I mean, so...
All right, so where do you stand on the moon landing hoax? Because that kind of is hand-in-hand with a NASA that is out to deceive us at every angle.
Well, I'm not... I don't know.
Not going to take a position?
Well, I
don't blame you. I wouldn't.
It's tough because... I look at it like we have with the technology now, we still find it extremely hard. And we supposedly did it way back then with less technology than is what is in my Apple Watch.
Yeah.
And so I have a hard time with that. But then again, I have to say that we had some of the brightest minds working on it to make it possible.
Well, I suppose that the fact that the computing power in mission control and on the rockets themselves, the space capsule themselves, were less than what your Apple Watch has. That's probably why there were 400,000 people working on it.
Well, yeah, and when I was younger, back in the late '70s, I remember going. My father, he was a computer programmer, and I remember going to his work with him on the weekends, and just the computers that were in there were monstrous, just to do small little things. So,
Yeah.
Is it possible it was faked? Well, absolutely, it's possible. I don't know. It's a tough one for me.
You ever see the movie Capricorn 1?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, that's a good one about a faked landing on Mars. I think the story is they realized at the last minute that the mission was doomed to failure, but they didn't want to reveal that, so they ended up staging it, and they put the whole thing together like in the matter of a weekend to stage it. And I don't remember the details of it, but they got caught doing it.
Next, you're going to tell me like The Walking Dead isn't real and all that stuff.
I won't burst that bubble for you.
Well, I mean, I don't think we're going to be here long, according to what this former Polish president was talking about.
Which Polish president is that, and what is he saying?
Yeah, nice lead in there. All right, so the former Polish president just expressed concerns about a possible alien invasion. So I guess if we're a flat Earth, we don't have to worry about an alien invasion, right?
Yeah, I don't. If we're domed,
we're not talking
flat,
about like Donald Trump's alien invasion. We're talking about,
extraterrestrial.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So the former president of Poland surprised his audience at a recent speaking engagement when he began discussing UFOs and how an alien invasion might unfold. Lech Walesa, who presided over the country from 1990 to 1995, made the remarks while addressing a civic group in the town of Krosno. To the surprise of the attendants, the ex-politician indicated that he has become a believer in the idea that intelligent extraterrestrials not only exist, but pose a threat to the safety of Earth.
Wow, that's really ironic. I actually just a friend of mine put a poll on Facebook, answer one of this question, right? And he said, "Here's a simple poll for you." And I replied, trying to be a smart guy, saying, "I got even a simpler poll," and I put a picture of Lech Walesa up on the Facebook post yesterday. Now he's in the news about UFOs. There's something synchronistic here.
Well, and I have a hard time believing what you just said.
What's that?
You said your friend, Facebook. I don't buy it. But anyways, moving on from that. Specifically, he stated that there are 3 levels of intellectual development in other galaxies, and sadly, the human species occupies the lowest tier.
Well, that I don't doubt.
No, I mean, it's just, how we don't.
I mean, if you look at Facebook at all, you'll see that.
How we don't drown when we're drinking. It's just insane. I mean, how the human population's made it. But as such, he cautioned that a visit from these advanced beings could be pretty much just totally destruction for our planet. Should we try to challenge the ETs, he claimed, they will interrupt us and cut us in half, which is kind of a
I mean, thought. I don't know that Lech Walesa is any expert on extraterrestrial life or their military capabilities. But as a former president of Poland, in fact, he was the one. Lech Walesa is kind of credited for bringing down ending the Cold War. He was the first to really break away from the Soviet bloc, and he's a hero in Poland.
I'm just impressed that you were able to say his name better than me. So, but bottom line, he says the Earth will collapse, and he believes that such an invasion scenario could set the human race back 5,000 years and become a need for our civilization to rebuild from scratch. But don't go running off building your little shelters yet, JV, because well, of course, one might be wondering where he learned this fantastic information, if he got it from his position in the Polish government or not. The former president indicated that his knowledge about aliens and the UFO phenomenon is actually derived from watching YouTube videos.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay, it's just like the rest of us. Yeah.
I'm thinking he's got way too much time on his hands.
Just like, well, he's retired. He's,
So maybe with those, maybe he's a flat earther.
Does it say how old he is in the piece that you're reading? Because he's got to be in his 80s or so, I would think.
I mean, yeah,
or
maybe,
more.
I don't know,
right?
but he's into YouTube.
Yeah,
he's into YouTube. But so. I mean, if he's getting all this information from YouTube, I don't know.
Well, maybe he's listening to the program too. Maybe he is.
Yeah, so
he's streaming the show.
I have respect for you, sir. I just not always your beliefs. So.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, it's interesting with any world leaders willing to take that stance. that's a bit of an eye-opener in itself. I'm anxious to see what the UFO community says about a former world leader saying something like that, because I'm sure there'll be more to this story.
Well, absolutely. But I don't know. It's definitely interesting. And you would think that a man in his position would have had some sort of inside information on some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yeah. All right. Well, so you ready to talk about Jack the Ripper?
No, but let's do it. I'm excited about it. So,
me too.
all right. So we're going to take a quick break and get our guest on the line, Michael Hawley. You're listening to Jason JV Beyond Reality Radio. We'll be back after this.
Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johaw. That's JOHAW. Our discussion tonight is with a returning guest, Michael Hawley. Now, there's a headline that's making a lot of noise within these circles, and the headline reads, Jack the Ripper possibly identified by DNA. And we're going to talk about that. Michael Hawley has investigated the Jack the Ripper story and written books about it. He was on, in June, I think, talking about a book in which he was looking at suspect Dr. Francis Tumblety. Michael, welcome back to Beyond Reality Radio. Great to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be back.
Thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
It's been a while since you've been on the program. Almost a year. This is pretty astounding news, and we're going to get into this. But before we do, I want to reintroduce you to our audience, and we have a lot of new affiliates and new listeners. So some people might not be familiar with your work. So let's start there. When did you first start taking an interest in the Jack the Ripper story?
It happened about around 2009 when I got involved. I was waiting for another book I had published with the publishers, but it was at the time the economy was really hurting, and so they were kind of holding off on publishing. So then I had heard about I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I'd heard about that there was a suspect buried near me in Rochester, New York, and he was a significant suspect, and his name was Francis Tumblety, which got me interested in there, and I found out where his gravesite was and visited that, and that started the researching. And so then I got involved with the folks in London and England and elsewhere, and it kind of after about over a dozen research articles and 2 books, there has been just a ton of information, brand new information on the Jack the Ripper suspect, Dr. Francis Tumblety. So, and that's what our discussion last year was, because we had found that a few years before the Ripper murders, he told this young man, as he was showing his surgical knives, that all streetwalkers should be disemboweled, and he was already a suspect, and this was just further damning evidence. So it got exciting, and so, but in the meantime, the Ripperology community, as we're researching every single suspect, and even more than that, just the victims, and at the same time, this is when, but years earlier, about 2014, is when the first time the owner of this shawl had claimed that there was DNA evidence of the Jack the Ripper on it, which was a different suspect. So then we've been quite involved with that as well.
When was it announced that there was possible DNA evidence on the shawl?
Well, the shawl was a man named Russell Edwards had purchased the shawl in 2007 at an auction, and the Black Museum at the time, and Alan McCormick, said that told him that the case had been solved, that it was Aaron Kosminski, which has been one of the top suspects, and so what Russell Edwards did. He bought it for $3 million. And because there's a little bit of history to that, I could go into the history of the shawl as well.
Yeah, let's do that after the break, though.
Okay.
We've got about a minute here, but go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just didn't want to get into those details yet.
Okay, and so what happened was he had a couple geneticists test and found some a blood stain that they assumed that was one of the victims, and then they saw a possible semen stain. And so they could only do mitochondrial DNA test on both, and then they tested the descendants of both those, the victim and the killer, and claimed that there was a match. So they had the DNA of both victim and killer on a shawl. Therefore, that killer was Jack the Ripper. That's kind of what they said in 2014, but they made a fatal error, and I can tell you about that later as well.
We have about a minute here. What is the reason that this particular story has remained so fascinating to so many people? I mean, we have a lot of serial killers in our history, whether they're American or British, and we have many that are unsolved. Why is this one so fascinating?
Because one thing is it has been unsolved, but at the time in 1888, just a few years before that, is when transatlantic cable communication kicked in, news cable communication. So what was happening, it was the first time that people, even in the United States, would see there's this unsolved murder going on. And it was also competitive newspapers were trying to kind of get an edge up on the other newspapers. So there was a tad bit of sensationalism, pictures were being drawn, and so kind of the whole hype. And then what happened at that time was that Scotland Yard had the idea of publishing one of the Ripper letters, one particular letter that said Jack the Ripper. And when that happened, that just caused sensation everywhere. And then, since it's been unsolved, people have been researching continually, and it's been kind of now in almost folklore. So.
Yeah, legend for sure.
Yes.
We forgot to do this at the beginning of the program, which we like to do is just let you know who's coming up on the show. Tomorrow night, Andy Thomas will be here. He's a researcher and an author. He's going to be talking about mysteries and conspiracies. He'll be talking about views on truth, any kind of mystery, global freedom issues. He talks about these things in lectures. He's written books about them, including conspiracy areas of all kinds, surveillance agendas. Jay, you and I have talked about that quite a bit, the surveillance stuff, and how concerning that is.
Anytime I lose an email, I just ask the NSA to send it back to me.
Yeah, they're pretty good, but they keep everything. So, yeah. Media misrepresentations, which is another thing that people are talking about a lot, and restrictions on free speech, which, again, is a hot topic right now. That's all tomorrow night. It will be with the Shark, though. Bruce Marcuson will be sitting in for the two of us.
Yes, he will. So make sure you tune in. If you haven't yet, head over to facebook.com/Beyond Reality Radio, like the Facebook page for us. Then head to BeyondRealityRadio.com. You can find all the stations we are on across the country. You can also download the free smartphone apps, which allow you to listen live, catch past shows, join the online chat, and more. Tonight we're live. Just click the Listen Live button. You can listen right there from the website while hanging out in an online chat room with a great community of people.
And tonight we're talking with Michael Hawley. There's been news about the Jack the Ripper murders. It's an unsolved crime from 130 years ago. And recent DNA tests may have pointed to the culprit. Michael Hawley is an expert on the subject, has written books on the subject, has explored it, has researched it, and knows it inside and out. And Michael, again, thanks for being here. I want to get to the history of this shawl. It was this shawl from one of the victims, at least it's purported to be from one of the victims, that these DNA samples were taken from. Tell us about this shawl.
Well, in 1988, a man named Paul Harrison was researching an upcoming book. In 1988 is the 100-year anniversary, basically, of the Ripper murders of 1888. And so he heard about this John and Janice Dowler that had apparently framed two pieces of a shawl that was on one of the Ripper victims, Catherine Eddowes. And so when he researched it, he found out that the great-great-nephew of one of the Scotland Yard acting sergeants at the time, Amos Simpson, apparently the great-great-nephew, his name is David Melville Hayes, said that this Amos Simpson had taken it from the Ripper victim because he knew that it was a famous murder and kept it in the family, so it was a family story. So what happened is Hayes traded that. The shawl is a silk shawl, 8 foot by 2 foot. He cut a couple pieces off it and framed it and traded it to the Dowlers for this first copy of the Radio Times magazine, and then so they had that. So then what happened was in 1993, David Hayes donated the rest of it to Scotland Yard's Black Museum. And in 1996, the Dowlers sold their piece to an antique dealer who in turn sold it to this Andy and Sue Parlor. So, but the Black Museum, what they decided to do, they wanted to test to see if it was from the Victorian era, and they actually had local the Sotheby's test it, and they determined it was Edwardian or 1900s, not the 1888. But by 2007, Russell Edwards had bought it at the auction, and so then that kind of started it. So, but Russell Edwards claims that the Black Museum was saying that it was the real thing.
What type of, let me just interrupt here. What type of testing can they do to make a differentiation between early 20th century versus late 19th century?
So, would be just the design and the material.
Okay.
And so that's what they were doing. So it's not 100%, but they seem to think that it was more towards an Edwardian. But then what Russell Edwards would say that they have others that would say it was Victorian. So he still had it tested genetically, and what he did is he used a geneticist from Liverpool, John Moores University, Jari Llewellyn, and then he had a partner, David Miller, and they apparently identified the blood stain and a semen stain, even though they didn't get any semen out of it, but they still got mitochondrial DNA. So not just regular nuclear DNA, so it follows the egg, so it has to be maternal. So they have to, when they do that, they first tested it, and then they have to have a descendant, but it has to be a matrilineal descendant from the mother's mother's mother. And so what they claimed back in 2014 was that there was this rare mitochondrial DNA marker, 314.1C, on the bloodstain that matched the descendant of Catherine Eddowes. Well, what the ripperologists got that, and it's not that they're trying to debunk it. A lot of them really would like this because some of these ripperologists certainly did believe that Aaron Kosminski was the killer. So a man named Chris Phillips and this Tracy Inson, they realized that the geneticist got it wrong. It wasn't 314.1, it was 315.1, which is a common DNA marker. 99% of the European population have that. So we didn't hear anything more until March of 2019 when they published this in a peer-reviewed journal, Journal of Forensic Science. And both of them, in this time, they claimed that they said that although I read the entire thing, but it says although these characteristics are surely not unique, they fully support their hypothesis. And so then the press got a hold of that, and so now it's in the national news. So what happened though was that there was two major areas of problems with this. One is the genetics, and the other is the provenance of the shawl. That we've known that there's a big problem with Catherine Eddowes having that shawl. And then the genetics. What happened is that there's a Jonathan Manges runs a casebook Rippercast, and he collected some of the top ripperologists, and they interviewed the top geneticists in England, forensic geneticist, Dr. Turi King from the University of Leicester, and she who was actually the one that sequenced the whole genome of King Edward III. So she is the foremost expert, and so she explained what the fatal flaws in the genetics. And so there's two issues, and that's one of the things that I can talk about. I can go into some of those.
Well, yeah, and we'll definitely be talking about that. But now, didn't they tested this DNA on this thing with one of Kosminski's living descendants, correct?
Matrilineal. So Kosminski did not have any descendants. So his sister's name was Matilda. So Matilda had a daughter and then daughtered. So what they did was they tested the matrilineal descendant of actually Matilda, and that's one of the problems is they didn't say that in the paper. That was discovered later. So that's what they were claiming, that those two DNAs matched.
Now, you've kind of hinted at this as well, and I know that one of the biggest difficulties is proving that this shawl actually belonged to that victim. What's the status, and what are the odds that it actually was hers?
Almost impossible, because first of all, the Amos Simpson was a Scotland Yard patrol constable at the time, and and one of the problems is Catherine Eddowes was murdered in Mitre Square, which is under the jurisdiction of the City of London Police Department. And so they would not allow any Scotland Yard police officer near that. They didn't. The two police departments didn't get along well anyway, but Simpson was actually around at the time, but he was already on a beat a mile away in Scotland Yard jurisdiction, more in Whitechapel. This was in the city of London, which was really close, but what had happened is when Catherine Eddowes was murdered, there was a patrol constable there within minutes because the body was still steaming. And then right from that moment, it was a city police patrol constable. Right at that moment, his name was Harvey, PC James Harvey. Then multiple people were just surrounding the body until they, escorted the body away. So there was no chance for Amos Simpson to take anything. And that would be one of the big issues, is that there would be no reason why he would be in Mitre Square. And what the interesting thing is, the paper never makes a comment about that. You're supposed to put positive and negative things about that, even though they put some positive things. And then also in that case, that we have a complete itemized record and images drawn. They have Catherine Eddowes in her death state, and there was an artist, police artist, that drew it. Complete detail, and there's no shawl there. And then the complete itemized list. They have everything to the color, the size, and there's no shawl in any of those records whatsoever. And then then the last one of the other things is that what they've identified is in that shawl, in the blue indigo dye in the floral parts, is water soluble. That means anybody that's walking around at night with that, if it gets rained on, the dye is going to bleed. And then but we already know that where Catherine Eddowes was for the month before. She had left to a different town to do hop picking with her male friend, which didn't work. So they had to walk back to London, Whitechapel, and that day they had to, at 2:00, they sold his shoes to get money to get something to eat. So if she has this silk shawl and they sold his shoes, you would think that she would probably sell that thing.
Yeah.
And then what happened she claimed that she went to her daughter's, Annie, who was an adult at the time, to get money. But what she really did she got completely drunk, and 8:30 p.m. is when one of the patrol constables saw her kind of just drunk on the ground. So they brought her in the jail cell to wait until she kind of can walk on her own. And then that's kind of what happened when they let her go. Soon after that is when she was murdered. But there would be really no possibility of the shawl. So that was 2014 when that's what, and everybody was talking about. This was Catherine Eddowes' shawl. So then reading the article, I realized now what they're saying is no, they are under the theory that it was Aaron Kosminski's shawl. So he brought this silk shawl to the murder to kill her. And while he eviscerated the organs and ripped off and cut a piece of the apron of Catherine Eddowes, and then that fell in another place, he left the shawl. And it's kind of like just really kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
So the provenance of that shawl is it's always been highly questionable.
Does a situation like this, and I'm not even sure it would do any good. Maybe the DNA is too degraded, but does a situation like this, and is it even possible to do an exhumation to determine whether the DNA is a match with the victim?
Well, they don't really. I mean, they could still do this properly. Let's say they use the descendant of one of them, the matrilineal. So the descendant. Now they're using mitochondrial DNA. They could not get any nuclear DNA, but the mitochondrial DNA. And the problem with the semen, remember, Y chromosome is the male thing. That's in the head. So they could only use the tail of the semen to get the mitochondrial DNA. So, but they could still use the descendants, and here's why it's an issue, and that's why Dr. Terry King was talking about this, is besides that, a peer-reviewed article is designed for peer experts to review it, all the data and the conclusion results, and put their 2 cents into it. Well, they hid the data. they can't see the data. Most of the data. They're not allowing it. And this is a peer-reviewed article, so she's wondering why they allowed this to be in the article.
Yeah.
And then she said that the geneticist that did the testing is actually not an expert at this field, which is forensic science, as she is. And then so he's an expert in, let's say, a different area, so why is he doing it when there are experts that are doing this? And so then what happened was that she looked at the DNA stuff, the processes, the procedures, and they've made a number of mistakes, and I could kind of talk about that. But one of the biggest, the fatal mistake, is that when they looked at the mitochondrial DNA supposedly from Aaron Kosminski that was on the semen stain, and they tested it with the matrilineal descendant of Aaron Kosminski, that there were two marker differences. And she was stunned because she goes, I don't know if he realizes that, but that's a mismatch. It's not a match.
Oh. We're talking tonight with Michael Hawley. He's an author and a researcher. MichaelLHawley.com is his website. He's written many books, a couple or a few on the Jack the Ripper story, including The Ripper's Haunts, Dr. Francis Tumblety, The Ripper's Hell Broth, and Jack's Lantern. I know that this story that we're talking about tonight, we've got a lot more to discuss, but we have a couple minutes here before our next break. Michael, tell us some of the things you're involved in. I know you just were doing some filming over in the UK, weren't you?
Yes, I was on the Travel Channel. There was an episode, a new series called The Legend Hunter, and it was January 20th. There should be some. I guess you can go on the Travel Channel to see it. And what it was is Pat Spain, the host. They were doing looking for again. It's a show on legends, and they wanted to do Jack the Ripper, and they were very interested in the new information that was discovered that I spoke with you about last year with Francis Tumblety, the damning information. So, and then what had happened was they found there was another letter that came up that was given to a Scotland Yard retiree in the 1960s, and that they were looking at to match up, and that kind of matched up with Francis Tumblety. And then, but that was the show that we did. So then, but we have a little documentary coming out for Francis Tumblety that we're going to be doing in this year, also with an Irish film director, Jason Figgis. So that's exciting.
Is it going to be a feature-length documentary?
This one is not a feature-length. As a matter of fact, thanks to your last show, I was contacted by some people that want to do a feature film, and so we did a screenplay. And then, strangest thing in the world, the person that was pushing this, sadly, he had passed from cancer in August. So, but that's been kind of passed on, and so we still have some of this material. So that's still pretty kind of hot going on. And in the meantime, I'm still doing lots of research with my research assistant Brian Young here, and then we've got a new article coming out called Tumblety's Secret, which we just discovered that not only did Francis Tumblety have antisocial personality disorder, neurosyphilis. So, and we have some kind of surprising evidence to support that, and that's one of the things that Jack the Ripper possibly was murdering these women because he had acquired that from them or something to that effect.
Yeah,
that wouldn't be exactly with Tumblety, but there was a lot of story about that as well. But
all right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and our guest, Michael Hawley, we're talking about Jack the Ripper. A lot more to come. You listen to Jason and JV Beyond Reality Radio. We'll be back after this.
Looking for our guest's book? Go to Amazon.com/shop/JVJ Taps. So I can't remember. Were you a fan of that Netflix movie Bird Box?
I thought it was pretty good. There were some weird little parts here and there, but I thought all in all, it was pretty good.
I am not a Sandra Bullock fan, so that made it a little...
You made that clear back then.
I'm about to make it clear again. So that made it hard for me to get into it. But at the beginning, I actually was wrapped up in it pretty quickly. but then I felt like it went nowhere, and the ending was so predictable to me. But
the ending was pretty predictable. I had actually called it out to the kids.
Yeah.
During the show, I'm like, wow, this kind of sucks, because if you're blind, everybody's going to be perfectly fine.
Right,
And
right.
what happens at the end? Everybody's blind.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Yeah. But it seemed to be quite a craze, and it got a lot of views on Netflix. Something like 45 million views in the first week or something. And then everybody was out doing the Bird Box challenge, where they would do things blindfolded,
Just stupid.
which was silly.
Kids driving cars, and just idiotic.
Well, they've just announced that the author of the book, the original book, which was also called Bird Box, is writing a sequel to it. And he is not saying whether or not it will be a movie, but I mean, Sandra Bullock is already being talked about to reprise the role. So I think that we can expect a Bird Box 2 or a sequel in some fashion.
Well, I don't even know how they would do it. It's what's going to be the plot behind it. You pluck your eyes out?
Well,
then you're safe?
What the author says is that they're going to go into more detail about what the monsters are, which I think is kind of important, because that was one of my criticisms of the first movie, is that we don't really know what it was.
It came out of nowhere. Yeah,
it could have been some demonic thing or whatever, but we don't know. All we know is that if you saw it, you died. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. It's always fascinating to watch something that hits by storm, and then I don't think there was a sequel ever planned for it, but now there will be one. So we'll see how it works.
Well, I'll definitely check it out. I know your love for Sandra Bullock, so I'm sure you'll.
Yeah, the original discussion here is that it will not be a Netflix movie. It'll probably be something they have to go to the theater to see, or at least that'll be a theatrical release in the beginning, and then do the rounds.
Which I find funny, because all the major movie companies out there were like tearing it apart.
Yeah.
Because of course they don't want Netflix to start, tromping in on their territory.
Right. Well, the whole landscape has changed. We've got a great show underway tonight. We're talking with Michael Hawley about the Jack the Ripper slayings and the mystery that still surrounds those occurrences from 1888. There's a lot to talk about with him. Tomorrow night, we've got Andy Thomas joining us. He's a researcher and an author on mysteries and conspiracies. We'll be talking about things like surveillance agendas, media misrepresentations, restrictions on free speech. These are all things that are very, very much in the mainstream discussion right now, all over social media, obviously, but people are concerned about all of these things. And tomorrow night, Andy will discuss them right here on the program.
Yeah, the shark's going to be filling in, and so make sure you tune in. If you haven't yet, head over to facebook.com/Beyond Reality Radio. Check that Facebook page out for us. Then head to beyondrealityradio.com, where you can find all the stations we air on. You can download the free smartphone apps and much, much more. If you download the show from iTunes or anywhere else, which we know it's being downloaded tens of thousands of times a day, we greatly appreciate the support. You can just take a moment of your time and rate it for us. It helps push the show forward, makes it easier to find, and that's what it's all about, is getting the word out.
All right, so our guest is Michael Hawley. He's written several books about Jack the Ripper and those notorious crimes. The Ripper's Haunts, Dr. Francis Tumblety, who we're going to continue to talk about tonight, The Ripper's Hellbroth, and Jack's Lantern. And Michael, we're talking about DNA evidence. Mm-hmm. The report that has resurfaced, because it was originally discussed in 2014, and it has come back, and it's been in a quote-unquote peer-reviewed journal, talking about DNA evidence that links Jack the Ripper's DNA to barber Aaron Kosminski.
Yeah.
And, we've been talking about this, and one of the things you keep bringing up is the mitochondrial DNA versus nuclear DNA. Explain to us why that's important in this discussion.
Well, the mitochondrial DNA is passed on through the egg, and it doesn't change. So nuclear DNA, so you get half from mom, half from dad, but then brothers and sisters won't have identical because of recombination. So there's going to be mixes. But mitochondrial DNA doesn't change. Now, the issue with my father's mitochondrial DNA came from his mom, but my mitochondrial DNA came from my mom. So we have different mitochondrial DNA, although we have the same Y chromosome sex DNA. So the Y chromosome follows the name, basically, the father's father. But they couldn't identify any of that type of DNA but mitochondrial DNA, and that's what they had said they tried to do. They also only tested one cell. and that's what Dr. Terry King says is a difficult thing. Contamination is a serious problem with that. But what happens is when Aaron Kosminski's sister, Matilda, had a daughter, and then that daughter had another one, and that's who they tested. And so even though they don't want to give the name out, but that's the matrilineal descendant. And so what Dr. King said is when you only have 2 or 3 generations, the mitochondrial DNA will have basically 0 mistakes, or at worst 1. And what the results that the geneticist got were 2 markers or mistakes. So 2 markers that on the mitochondrial DNA, that what they were using was a mitochondrial bit. Now there's this microscopic stuff that's only 100 letters long, really teeny, and what they have to do is it's called PCR amplification, is they have to make millions of copies of this thing. So then what they have to do is after they make the millions of copies, then they got to read it, and that's what is sequencing, and they have to do it forward and backwards. So what they're looking at is 100% match when they look forward compared to, from the copy, and then they will reverse, and it's supposed to be 100% match. Once they get 100% match forward and reverse, then they're confident that they got the right one because there's so much contamination and also different parts of different markers. And so what happened, though, in this case is when they went forward, they got 100% match. When went backwards, they got 99.2% match. And Dr. King had said to the on Rippercast when she was talking to the ripperologist that means that there's something wrong, and it's the responsibility of the scientist to report what's going on there. And she said that when she ever gets that, they discard it and do it again so they can get the 100-100. They used it. So what they did is they ignored the 99.2% stuff, and they used the 100% match side and assumed that this was correct. And that's right there is what she called was bad science. So it's what we're looking at the mitochondrial DNA. And the other issue with the mitochondrial DNA is that it's populations. So basically, Caucasians have the same mitochondrial DNA. Now, there are some markers that are different. And so what had happened is that when you look at, let's say, people will do a mitochondrial DNA for your family ancestry. Mm-hmm. And what happens is they don't get an exact match of anything. They don't match, let's say, for example, Aaron Kosminski is supposed to have been a Polish-Russian Jew, which means that would be considered an Ashkenazi Jew during the diaspora, when the Jewish diaspora went into the Eastern Europe. And then in 1882 is when Aaron Kosminski came to England. And so what they did was they did 2 testings on this. They tested the matrilineal descendant, matched it up with that semen stain. But then also what they did is they took that and they tested it on a database, and kind of like an Ancestry.com kind of database. And what they were looking for to see if it was Ashkenazi Jewish DNA. Well, they claim they got that, but when researcher Chris Phillips went in there, they realized that in that data bank there was only one match, and that match was not Jew; it was Gentile. And so that's confused us. And what Dr. King was saying is that it's all about frequency. Now, that marker may have a high frequency with the Ashkenazi Jewish population, but it has low frequency with so many other places, and maybe even high frequency somewhere else. So that your particular descendant could be let's say, came from Latvia or somewhere else that is not even Ashkenazi Jewish. And so she says that you can't just absolutely say it's 100% correct. So when the news was saying that they have just identified, you just can't do that. And it's actually, you could see that the authors knew that. That's why they kind of said that although these characteristics are surely not unique, they fully support the hypothesis. Well, they're not unique, and they don't support it, especially with when there were two differences in that.
Let's talk for just a minute here about this particular suspect. I mean, we've talked about the DNA component here, and you've mentioned basically his heritage. But who was this guy, and why was he someone who was considered a suspect back in 1888 to begin with?
Well, Aaron Kosminski was mentioned by some of the top Scotland Yard police officials. And the first time, 1894, Chief Constable Melville McNaughton, who took over. So he was after the last murder. There were murders the next year that they actually thought were White Ripper murders, and McNaughton was in charge. But by 1894, he was talking in his memoranda, and he made a comment about this Polish Jew that resident and named him as Kosminski, and said that he is a strong suspect because he had a hatred of women and homicidal tendencies, and that he was removed to a lunatic asylum about March 1889, which is about 6 months after the murders. So that's where the name came up. But McNaughton then rejected him and opted for another person named Druitt. Yet Chief Inspector Swanson, who was kind of running the Whitechapel murder at the time, and his boss, who was the Assistant Commissioner Anderson, they championed Kosminski as their favorite. And what they did was there was a particular eyewitness that was with one of the murders that they believed saw Jack the Ripper, and they took that person, who was a fellow Jewish person, and showed him Aaron Kosminski and said that was the killer, but refused to go to court, so got away. And so what happened basically was then Aaron Kosminski went into a lunatic asylum, this Colney Hatch lunatic asylum, the next year. Actually 1891, he was readmitted, because he only went to the asylum initially at March 1889 for just 3 weeks. And so so that's why he is considered one of the a significant suspect, because there's Scotland Yard officials that, in hindsight, believe that was the killer. Now, there are some mistakes, and then that they are making. So there's not a definitely we can't say he was Jack the Ripper, but we can say that we can't negate him because he is a credible suspect. And in 1988, when the shawl came into kind of like the understanding that there's a shawl around, the top suspect at the time was Aaron Kosminski, because in 1988 there was a special that Peter Ustinov had, and it was called The Secret Identity of Jack the Ripper, and they had a panel of experts. And these ripperologists, who were still the top ripperologists, Martin Fido, Paul Begg, and Don Rumelo, they kind of told these panel of experts, FBI experts, British experts, about these and gave them the details, and the experts selected Aaron Kosminski as who they believed. They used William Gull, and they used Druitt, and then, but at the time, today we have, they did not know about Francis Tumblety at the time, because he kind of came back in the scene in the 1990s, and then there's other ones like George Hutchinson, and then there's the Maybrick Diary, There's so a number of other really credible suspects that have popped up that makes the whole ripperology scene very exciting. And but all of us say this: is you can't ignore Kosminski.
Sorry about this, Michael. It's a very, very short break because we went long in the last segment. But I wanted to ask you about the semen evidence that is reportedly on this shawl. Was there? This is the first I'm kind of hearing of that evidence being there. Do we know that all these crimes had a sexual component to them that would produce that kind of evidence?
The answer is they did not. It looks to be that, there was quick evisceration. So Catherine Eddowes, they once got there, it was like there was a patrol constable that goes by every 15 minutes. First time, saw nobody. Second time, her body's been eviscerated, so there was no chance of that. And then so when you look at that, especially Dr. Brent Turvey, who is he's a modern forensic scientist that had looked at that, he noticed he did not see any sadomosexual anything. Sadistic behavior is mutilation while they're alive so that you can see the pain in the person. It's been confirmed that these women were killed first, throats cut, and then they were eviscerated. And then so it was like they had a purpose. And one of them was anger retaliatory was the motive that Dr. Turvey had brought out.
Phone number is 844-687-7669. We're talking with Michael Hawley about the Jack the Ripper slayings and the ongoing mystery, and a report that has resurfaced, because it was out originally in 2014, that some DNA testing may have found the actual person responsible for those murders. Our guest tonight, Michael Hawley, has a lot of problems with that report and that information. And one of the things we're talking about was the bodily fluids found on the shawl. And you're saying, and we had to cut you off, you're saying, Michael, that these crimes, there wasn't enough time for those types of fluids to be deposited anywhere. So how could they be some evidence of any kind?
Yeah, or that if they may have, let's say, so my point is that they didn't because they were not sex crimes. But if they were, let's say, for example, if you were a proponent of Aaron Kosminski, then you would say sadosexual, even though Dr. Turvey rejects that, but you could still say that because we do know that Aaron Kosminski, the reason why they said he went insane is because of self-mutilation, or which was basically masturbation, and that sadosexual serial killers tend to have a higher rate of masturbation, and that's kind of the idea. So that the fact that stain was on the shawl, if it was owned by Aaron Kosminski, he didn't necessarily have to do it then.
So, JV, very possibly you're a serial killer.
I'm not sure what that means.
So, moving on. Yeah. Hey, let me ask this, Mike. Have you ever looked into the whole idea? A good friend of ours has been on the show many times, Jeff Mudgett, who wrote a book and also did a show talking about how he believed his great-great-grandfather, H.H. Holmes, the serial killer, happened to be Jack the Ripper.
Right. Yes, actually, and then and we actually talked about it a little bit last time too. There are some issues with that. A lot of the experts, ripperologists, they don't consider that as strong as what Jeff would like to have been. One, for example, the idea that H.H. Holmes was in Chicago during the summer of 1888. No record of him here in the fall of 1888. And then, therefore, he was in England murdering these women. And so, but we do have he forgot to look at the voting records because it was 1888, and we have record of him being in Chicago in voting. And also, one of his sons was born 9 months after October 1888. So maybe his wife had, it was not really his son, but that means he should have. His wife was in Chicago at the time. But there were a number of other big issues that, like when I watched the show, that they did this composite of like 15 or so eyewitness accounts, and the person looked almost identical to H.H. Holmes. And the problem is nobody saw the murders. And so no one saw the murders. And there is no eyewitness accounts of the murders. And that's what Melville McNaughton, Chief Constable McNaughton, was trying to say. That he had said that nobody saw the murders, even though there are some people that had possibly seen, let's say, Catherine Eddowes just before. And there are 3 witnesses that saw Catherine Eddowes at just outside of Mitre Square. So, but they admitted they didn't see her face. They just thought that was her. So then they weren't really thinking Jack the Ripper's with her. So when they're looking, they're not thinking about that. And then so, and when we look at those the suspect eyewitness testimonies of those particular 15, they are very general, as in height, maybe color, and it was always dark. And then, and so the next thing you know, nobody has his facial features. And I just remember in that show, the facial features the eyes look just like Holmes. And so I think that was a little bit of a movie magic thing. So, but one thing though we do promote for sure is make sure he keeps on researching, because if he's going to find some more stuff, that's what we need, because it's all about reliable knowledge. And so the problem is there's always people wanting to, put out some conspiracy theories without any data. So, but it's always important to keep on the research.
We've had people comment about the shawl idea here too, and you referenced it a bit, that some theorize it may have been Jack the Ripper's shawl. And someone said that there's been speculation that Jack the Ripper used to use things like shawls or clothes or something to lure the women. Is there any truth to that you're aware of?
No, not at all. It would, if you look at where the women were murdered, they're right off the beaten path of the two busy streets, Whitechapel Road and Commercial Street, and when you look at that, that's where the prostitutes were, not just full-time prostitutes, just unfortunates, that women that would do it part-time, whatever, and then they would have to go off the beaten paths because they didn't want to get caught, and then so. But to lure them, they all wanted money. It wasn't anything else. These women were selling that kind of stuff for money stuff. But the case with that, I haven't heard much of that. Could it be? Maybe, but there's really no direct evidence for that.
So, based on our, everything we've talked about here, and based on how you've refuted so much of the claims that these DNA tests and the people that conducted them are offering, it sounds like you're still fully in the camp of Dr. Francis Tumblety being the culprit.
Yes, but I always say never case closed. If I do that, then I'm done researching, and then so what I do is I keep on finding more material. And I love having the great thing about the Ripperology community is these people they don't give you an inch, and so especially the biggest the reviewer, one of the top researchers, Paul Begg, he'd reviewed both my books, and he is not, nobody would say he was a Tumblety proponent, and he actually had said that my book. My first book was Head and Shoulders Above the Rest, and the second one is the go-to book for Tumblety. We got to take him seriously. So he didn't say he's Jack the Ripper. We'll never do that. I mean, there's a dozen confession letters. To find out who he is exactly, that would be quite difficult. And so they tried to do that with the DNA stuff, which is, again, that's a great thing to research, but there's so many holes in it that they'll have to go back to the drawing board on that, and especially when they're assuming it's a semen stain, they're assuming it's a blood stain. That in the article, they don't. It's not like confirmed with that as well.
Where do you, as a researcher and somebody who is just passionate about finding the answers here, where do you continue looking? What stones have not yet been unturned? Oh,
well, Tumblety, it's amazing. There's just more. As I just found out, my article is 13,000 words, and so it's ready. I'm almost ready for a third book, and then we're finding so much. But one of the things that you can do is, in the Ripperology world, there are places that there are authors, researchers, but then there are people that kind of hold the gate, as in, let's say, for example, this JTR Forums run by Howard Brown. He collects everything, and it's on there. So what I do is I'll just go into his website and look at some of the material, and a lot of it is people have seen, but you don't. If you don't know the background of Tumblety, you don't know what date, and that's one of the things I know, which particular date, where he was, what he was doing, and then why is that there. So then if I find a little red flag, then I go for it. And then that's has helped me out quite a bit. And then, and it just depends. Like in that it is funny how here it is, a 130-year-old mystery, and we're still finding so much. As I said, last year, 900 pages of sworn testimony, 46-plus sworn testimonies on Francis Tumblety in the last 20 years of his life. That was just an eye-opener, and it basically confirmed what Stuart Evans had said all along when he discovered Tumblety in 1992, that he was taken seriously as a suspect, and we should. And then, does it have a picture of the Ripper victims? No, but it's got some, damning evidence. As I was saying, he's telling people to all streetwalker should be disemboweled, and he says that before the murders. That's pretty amazing to me.
Is that shawl, which obviously its authenticity is questioned right now, but is that the only piece of physical evidence that exists that we can? Is there anything else we can substantiate?
Well, so far they've really destroyed all the records, and now some of the records, like the Special Branch has some records. They were not directly involved with the Whitechapel murders, but they were indirectly involved. But those are still closed to us, and so lots we would just love to have those. But with physical evidence, that's the problem. And so when the shawl came up, that was quite exciting because the family, to me, probably what happened is that here's a man that was a police constable in Scotland Yard during the murders, and so you can see, things get passed on to the family, stories that maybe not exactly true, but they do pass on. Even in my family, they said that there was a judge in the family, and I found out that was just a complete lie. So it's got to be corroborated, and so that's the thing. So we do find everything. So for example, they found there was a show that they had Francis Tumbly's hat, and there was a gun inside it, an old hat, and so I could have corroborated that, but they didn't ask me about that because we've been doing so much research on the descendants of all Tumbly's families to corroborate that hat. That hat was sold for, I think, $10,000 recently.
You said it was on a show. What do you mean it was on a show, like a TV show?
Yeah, I'm trying to Pawn Stars. There it is. It was on Pawn Stars.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
So here it is. I'm watching in Francis Tumbly's hat, and then so I'm looking at it, and then Francis Tumbly, it was a top hat, and he always went to the shows, the performances, and then even in from Rochester to Buffalo, everywhere he was going there. So. And then, remember, I think I told you before, 1863, he was in Buffalo watching John Wilkes Booth, who was performing in Buffalo.
Right.
And so hanging out with John Wilkes Booth. And so, of course, Tumbly was implicated 2 years later, but he denied knowing Booth. So, so that top hat. So we tried to contact Pawn Stars and say, they bought it for $4,000 and they sold it for $10,000. And we said I could help verify if that's correct, because wherever they found it, I could see if that was actually a family member. Because Tumbly had all of his material in Rochester. His niece, Mary Fitzsimmons, was the one that stored all of his stuff, and he was a millionaire. But he was traveled all over the place, and he couldn't bring everything. So I went back to Rochester, and that's what we found out is the buildings have all since been destroyed. So who knows where all this material is? And then, trying to look for his old uterus collection, too, but that won't happen.
Wow. So, what do we need to find to put this case to bed? Is there something out there that you suspect exists that we're just, opening up the right trunk in the right attic away from finding?
I don't think there will be. The way I see it is that you need to collect as much reliable knowledge as possible to paint a better picture, and that's what's going to be as close as we can get. But then again, in the future, let's say, one of the things that Dr. Terry King was talking about is we have, if that shawl, if the descendants were even in the same room, you can breathe DNA out.
Yeah.
And so there's contamination. So it's really hard, that chain of custody, to find that. So, but what happened 25 years ago, there was a diary found, and it was the Maybrick Diary, and many people are convinced. If you read that, it certainly sounds like he's Jack the Ripper, and and then they're trying to date the diary. So there are some, but so we keep on going that way, but there are some problems with it as well. But of course there's going to be. So I would say no in one respect, but we were surprised when we got 900 pages of new material for Tumblebee.
But as we get further and further into the future from these crimes, we're running out of leads, we're running out of things like that. So will we ever truly know?
Yeah, right. So it'll, and then who knows, some kind of new technology that'd be interesting if you could pick up the memories of something.
Yeah, right. We've spent the whole time talking about this Jack the Ripper case. You do other work too. Anything else you've got going on that you want to share with us?
I continue to do the research with Francis Tumblety, because there's actually more going on, and I've got partners that are working on it, because there are some gaps in time that we can find out, especially where Tumblety was in 1887, 1888 in London area, and we've come up with some cool things, but I'm not allowed to talk about that yet.
Interesting. Tease us there. But you'll come back and you'll share it with us, right?
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for coming and hanging out with us, Michael. It's always a pleasure talking with you, and we look forward to having you on again.
Well, thank you very much.
Hey, Jay, you hungry? I just heated up a couple potatoes. Here, let me grab them out of the microwave.
No, JV, don't.
My thumb!
Crapco presents.
Don't let this happen to you. Crapco's Thumbrella is the perfect protection for the perfect unfinger. My thumb! The Crapco Thumbrella is made up of high-quality, heat-resistant asbestos and perfectly suited to handle the most dangerous jobs. Just don't breathe near it.
The Crapco Thumbrella.
Use the Thumbrella for ultimate thumb protection while
using matches,
pouring coffee,
sunbathing near the pool,
changing spark plugs,
handling kill-fired ceramics,
and so much more. And how about those romantic candlelit dinners? Come over here, baby.
Watch the candle.
Don't worry, I brought protection. Thanks, Thumbrella. The Crapco Thumbrella usually sells for $29.95, but call now and we'll triple your order, one for each thumb. And with every order today, Crapco will donate 30 cents to safety. Save a Forgotten Thumb International. The Crapco Thumbrella is the only safety-approved thumb protection device on the market. And isn't your thumb worth it?
The Crapco Thumbrella should not be considered a thumb protection device and is illegal in some states. In fact, most states. In fact, all states.
Do you remember those dark days when my thumb was injured? And
I do.
I could barely function. It was weeks.
I mean,
it was weeks of
it
torture.
took you like 4 times as long to send a text.
It already takes me long enough. So multiply that by 4. It's like a week to get a text out.
Oh, geez. Well, a big shout out and a thanks to Michael Hawley for coming on, hanging out with us tonight, and just talking about Jack the Ripper. And it's such an interesting topic. And again, I mean, just how long ago it was. Unless something major happens.
That's why I think there's got to be like a letter in a trunk somewhere in London.
Somebody saying, hey, I'm Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. Or even like hair samples from the victims or something like that, in a scrapbook kind of thing. That could happen. I mean, that's the only way it's going to be solved, right?
Yeah. Jeez. Creepy. But anyways, and just remember that Bruce the Shark is going to be filling in tomorrow, so he'll be here taking your calls and doing interviews and doing what he does best. If you haven't yet, head over to facebook.com/Beyond Reality Radio, like that Facebook page for us. Then head to beyondrealityradio.com, find all the stations we are on, get our free smartphone apps, listen live right from the website and more. And also subscribe to the show on iTunes so you can download it for listening later. Just take 2 seconds of your time when you do and rate it for us. It helps push it forward, makes it easier to find, and it really helps us out greatly. But that's going to do it for us. You're listening to Jason and JV, Beyond Reality Radio. We'll catch you all soon.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by J.V. Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.